Welcome to another of our OJP's webinars. Today we're going to go over oversight responsibilities for subrecipients. Before we get started, I wanted to say, first I want to introduce myself. I'm Ira Holmes. I'm Training and Policy Manager here at OJP in the Office of the CFO. And again, we're going over your entity or the pass-through entity's oversight responsibilities for subrecipients. But before I get started, I want to talk about one thing. We are moving back to our in-person training. Many of you out there already may know that we have sent out, opened up registration for our October 3rd and 4th training. That is now closed. Very soon, in the next couple of days, we're going to open up registration for our next financial management training, a basic 2-day training. That'll be November 1st and 2nd. The way the first one filled up as quickly as it did, I strongly advise you to, as soon as you receive the email for the November 1st, 2nd training, to register, to make sure that you get your spot. Now, again, today we're going over pass-through entities, oversight responsibilities for subrecipients. First thing I want to say is that pass-through entity, I'm talking about you. This is your responsibilities for your subrecipients. To start off, what I'm going to do is go over a few definitions. What is a pass-through entity? I'm going to talk about a subaward and a subrecipient, a contractor versus a contract. Then I'm going to do a determination. I'll help you determine what a subrecipient is and versus a contractor. And then your responsibilities for your subrecipient. Then we're going to talk about the pre-award process and the post-award process. And finally, this training came about from OIG findings. So I'm going to go over a few of the findings that the OIG made and kind of the reason that we are here today. Like I said, we're going to go through definitions. What is a pass-through entity? I'm going to talk about, or I'm going to point to uniform guidance a lot. So a pass-through entity is a non-federal entity that provides a subaward to a subrecipient to carry out part of a federal program. It is, and another thing to say is that the primary grant recipient. So if I say that, then I'll say, what is a subaward? A subaward is an award provided by a pass-through entity to a subrecipient for the subrecipient to carry out part of the federal award. Again, that is from the Uniform Guidance to CFR 200, and I'll say .1, paragraph 1. A subrecipient does not include payments to a contractor or to an individual that is the ultimate beneficiary of that federal program. So when you're procuring goods or services, that is not a subaward. And to a beneficiary of the program, that is not a subaward. And what is a subrecipient? A subrecipient is a non-federal entity that receives a subaward from a pass-through entity to carry out that program. And what is a contract? A contract is a legal instrument by which a non-federal entity purchases goods or services needed to carry out the project or program under the federal award. Now, what is a contractor? A contractor is an entity that receives a contract as defined in as defined in contract on the previous slide. So once again, I'm going to point to the Uniform Guidance 200.1. Now, the hardest part, or one of the hardest parts, would be the subrecipient versus a contractor, or determining the difference between the subrecipient and a contractor. The determination is whether it's a subrecipient or a contractor in terms of whether the entity is receiving federal funds is not easy. There's no single factor that will determine what type of relationship one or the other, and an entity could possess characteristics of both, of subrecipient and as a contractor. The form is less important than the substance. Substance takes precedent over form. Substance refers to the characteristics of the arrangement and whether it casts the party receiving the funds in the role of subrecipient or as a contractor. Let me warn you though. Labeling an organization as a subrecipient or a contractor does not dictate how DOJ would treat that relationship. I ask you here to refer to Uniform Guidance 200.311. This chart here might help. This chart will show the differences, or will show some of what you should look for in determining the difference between a subrecipient and a contractor. So I'm going to go over each one on this chart. This is kind of important. A subrecipient determines who is eligible to receive what federal assistance under the program guidelines. Who's the beneficiary? A subrecipient has its performance measured in relation to whether objectives of the federal program were met. Subrecipient has responsibility for programmatic decision-making. Subrecipient is responsible for adherence to applicable program requirements specified in the award. And in accordance with this agreement, the subrecipient uses federal funds to carry out a program for a public purpose specified in the authorizing statute. Let me go back over each one of those and show you something. Each one of those uses the word program. First one, program guidelines. Second one, objectives of a federal program. Third one, has responsibility for programmatic decision-making. Fourth one is responsible for adherence to the applicable program. And the last one, to carry out a program for a public purpose. So that when you're looking at the difference or trying to distinguish the difference between subrecipient and contract, understand that the program is key. A contractor, on the other hand, provides goods and services within the normal business operation. What I'm really saying here is that's what they do. A contractor provides similar goods or services to many different purchases. Not just, it won't just be through the pass-through entity, that's the business that they're in. Contractor normally operates in a competitive environment. Again, that's what they do, they're in business. A contractor provides goods and services that are ancillary to the operation of the program. So it's not just what they're doing for your program or for the federal program that they're involved with. They're in business to provide that good or that service to, as it says up above, to many different purchasers. And a contractor is not subject to compliance requirements of the federal program. Now, one thing, if you notice on this page, I don't have a designation or I don't have a delineation for uniform guidance, because it's not required in uniform guidance that you document how you made the determination between subrecipient and contractor. However, strongly advise that you document how you did it and you maintain that documentation. Now, what are your responsibilities? Uniform Guidance 200 CFR, 2 CFR 200.332 says that your responsibilities including ensure that subrecipients use grant funds in accordance with all federal and program guidelines. Your job is to oversee the day-to-day operation of the subrecipients. Now, doesn't mean you're there day-to-day, but you're overseeing all of their operations on a day-to-day basis to ensure they achieve performance objectives on schedule and within budget. You, your subrecipient, you are to ensure that they make timely submission of all documents necessary to meet all reporting requirements of the awarding agency and all financial and performance reports that are required. And if you notice you're involved with, remember, overseeing their day-to-day operation, you're to take appropriate action to get the subrecipient back on track if problems arise, if they get off track. The use of subrecipients, and notice this slide is on its own in bright red letters. The use of subrecipients does not relieve the pass-through entity of your responsibilities. Regardless, I'm going to add to this, regardless of the amount of federal funds that are passed down to the subrecipient. Let's talk about your requirements in the pre-award process. A pass-through entity must, and I'm saying must, have established policies and procedures on how the subaward will be managed throughout the entire life of the subaward. The policies and procedures, as it says here, must be in writing and clearly describe your responsibility for managing the subrecipient. A pass-through entity must decide the appropriate instrument for the services, whether it be a subaward or whether it be a contract, and that is from the Uniform Guidance, .201. Subrecipient must have a method for announcing the specific funding opportunities, eligibility requirements, and the allotted time frame to apply. Right here, just right beside this public notice. A pass-through entity must have a process to review each subrecipient eligibility for federal funding and include the criteria to be used to evaluate each application. Again, in the pre-award process, you must ensure that subrecipients are not suspended or debarred by the federal government prior to making an award. Now, it's not a part of the Uniform Guidance, but away from the pre-award process, it is a good idea to follow up and recheck to see if your subrecipient has been, subsequent to the award, been suspended or debarred. That you can find that out on sam.gov. And you can find that out anytime, even after award on sam.gov. A pass-through entity must, and notice I said must on all of these, clearly identify the federal award information, compliance requirements applicable, and terms and conditions, and any supplemental requirements imposed by the pass-through entity. Uniform Guidance allows you to add additional terms and conditions for the subrecipient. You can be even more restrictive than we are on you with your subrecipient. However, let me give you one warning. You cannot impose additional terms and conditions that hinder the subrecipient from completing the goals of the program. And finally, a pass-through entity must include specific award identification data elements such as name, subrecipient name, entity identifier, what I'm saying is the UEI number, the federal award identification number, and the award date. Again, at the bottom of the slide, dot 332, paragraph A. While you're doing or in your pre-award assessment, you should, and everything on this slide, I'm talking about the things you should do. Perform a risk assessment of applicants prior to awarding funds. That is highly recommended. You should evaluate the risk posed by applicants before they receive a reward. Consider things like their eligibility and the quality of their application, any history you know of the applicant, the financial stability and the quality of their management system and their management team, and any audit findings that you have access to. Let me add one thing here. You can review the schedule of findings and question costs. You also can review the summary schedule of prior audit findings, and then you can use that. That can be part of your review to evaluate the subrecipient. The results of this risk assessment, and again, in the pre-award stage, can assist you in determining what additional terms and conditions. Remember, I said you can impose more restrictive terms and conditions on your subrecipient than we impose upon you. So this can help you in making that determination. Now, your requirements in post-award. The pass-through entity must perform a risk assessment of each subrecipient for noncompliance with federal statutes and regulations and terms and conditions of the subaward to determine the amount and the level of monitoring that is going to be required. There are a number of different attributes, and that's why I'm at the bottom of the slide, that consider when assessing the risk. And you should develop, and this is not in uniform guidance, but you should develop a scoring system. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that in a moment. Here's a scoring system. That's a simple one. Is subrecipient, and you measure these risk factors, and let's say we assign them a score of 1, 2, 3. So, and let's say 1 is low, 2 is medium, and 3 is high risk. If the award is confidential funds, the award is petty cash, we'll assign that a risk factor of 3. If the subaward amount is below $25,000, we'll consider that low risk, so we'll assign that a risk factor of 1. If the subrecipient in your review, remember in the pre-award process you've done this, has delinquent reports, then we'll assign it a risk factor of 2. The overall level of risk identified should report the frequency and the type of monitoring that you engage in. Some additional things to consider when doing a risk assessment on a subrecipient. Obviously, the award amount. Does the award have matching fund requirement? Is this a new subrecipient? And budget modification, any budget modification requests that are made. Now, these are a good idea. One thing I would say per uniform guidance, you should do a legal assessment. And any past suspension or debarment, remember SAM.gov will give you this information, must be considered. This is not a good idea. It must be considered. Any federal debt owed. And then you should do a financial assessment. Any delinquent reports, any audit opinions. Remember, you can look at the past audit, the audit opinions that are available, and financial reviews from other agencies for awards the subrecipient may have been involved in or may have received. Post-award process or the post-award risk assessment process. This will help you develop a monitoring plan of how your monitoring plan will be. So post-award subrecipient monitoring. You must develop an annual monitoring plan, and all subrecipients that will be monitored should be included in the monitoring plan. One thing I want to say, subrecipients from each risk level should be monitored. In other words, like when I had the little risk table there and we had high, medium, and low risk, any subrecipient, you're not just monitoring the high-risk subrecipients, but all of them. Type of monitoring that you're going to engage in, again, the risk assessment will tell you how in-depth or how the monitoring will be. So whether you do on-site monitoring or in-depth review, we call it desk review monitoring. Effective implementation of a monitoring plan may also result in identification of potential areas for training and technical assistance. Again, how involved you are. Remember earlier on we talked about the day-to-day involvement, how involved you are with the subrecipient. You should develop a monitoring objectives to ensure your subrecipients are carrying out program activities as stipulated in the award, that they have adequate internal controls to protect the federal dollars, that claim reimbursements for costs are allowable, reasonable, applicable, and necessary under the program, identify any conflicts of interest that exist, and maintain supporting documentation. Post-award process for your subrecipient monitor, I'll talk about a site visit. In preparation for your on-site visit, you should review all documentation, such as the subrecipient application, the written agreement that you have with that subrecipient, any financial and progress reports that you've received to date, the drawdown history for the subrecipients, and copies of any recent audit reports that you have access to. And when I said drawdown history, this is let me give you an example of what you're looking for. If you see drawdowns of 90% of the funds have already occurred, and then your program report tells you that 10% of the work or 10% of the projected program work has been completed, that's a red flag. They've drawn down 90% and only done 10% of the work on the program. That's the kind of thing you're looking for in monitoring when you're doing or when you're preparing to do your on-site visit. In post-award monitoring of your subrecipient, these are the best practices we advise. First thing in the site visit is notification. Have an entrance conference with the subrecipient. Ask for and receive supporting documentation. Have an exit conference with your subrecipient. Follow up with your subrecipient if required, if what you learned from your site visit requires a follow-up. A corrective action plan, if needed, from what happened on your site visit. And then make sure you close the site visit. And I'm going to talk about each one of these. When I say notification, send a formal notification letter several weeks before the visit. There should be no surprises. Make sure you know who's going to be there. Make sure they know why you're going to be there, what you're looking to be there for. Confirm dates so there's no ambiguity. And any documentation that you require, make sure, again, in that notification letter, you let them know everything that you're going to want to see while you're there. Finally, and this is very, very important, ensure that the key officials are at least available while you're there. When you're there, you're going to hold an entrance conference. It's going to be an on-site meeting with the appropriate, and I'm going to put that word appropriate, subrecipient staff, financial staff, program directors, depends on who they determine to be the appropriate staff. Make sure they're at the level that that they need to be for why you are there. I know that sounds kind of ambiguous, but make sure that you have it's sufficient, that they're at a sufficient level for what you are there for. Documentation, data gathering, analysis. Make sure you've asked for the documents even before you even got there. So make sure the documents are there, they are available to you, and all of the documents that you record, what you saw, what the documents told you, and what documents were missing, what documents weren't available to you while you were there. This looks like, and I'm sure many of you out there are saying, it looks a lot like an audit program. And the reason it looks like an audit program is it is. It's very much like an audit program you're doing when you're doing this on site. At the end of your on-site visit, you're going to hold an exit conference. You're going to meet with the key officials. Remember, you wanted them to be available while you were there. And you're going to talk about, one of the main things you're going to talk about is what still needs to be resolved, what you did not while you were there. You can talk about what you looked at, what you found, and the things that were resolved while you were there. And at the very bottom of the slide, I want you to pay special attention to, for all deficiencies that weren't resolved while you were there, there should be a clear understanding of any remaining things that you are looking for. And you follow that up with a follow-up letter. The follow-up letter, you say, you don't want this to be adversarial, so you follow up letter and you say what they did well. Talk about the things that you saw that they were doing well as far as the program goes. What they need to work on, what you addressed while you were there, and what still needs to be addressed. And main thing is, don't leave it open-ended. Don't leave it open-ended. What needs to be followed up on, you have a date certain that these things are going to be followed up on. If it's necessary, the subrecipient must submit a corrective action plan identifying the deficiencies resolved while you were there and any action that needs to be done. And finally, once you've received all the documentation and gone through it, once you've received the corrective action plan, once you've received any documentation to close anything that was not resolved during your site visit, you close the site visit. Now, the remedies for not for subrecipient noncompliance. The uniform guidance gives you, in 200.339, gives you direction for possible actions if a subrecipient doesn't comply with the federal statutes and regulations of the subaward. If noncompliance can be remedied by imposing additional conditions, these actions can be taken. Temporarily withhold funds pending correction of the deficiency that you've observed. Disallow all or part of the activity that was not in compliance. Wholly or partially suspend or terminate the subaward. Initiate suspension or debarment. Withhold any future subawards or other legal remedies that might be available to you in this relationship with the subrecipient. And now I'm going to talk about the post-award process or your closeout requirements. you may approve an extension of performance, but only within your own performance period. Because remember, you've received a performance period, and you have a certain date certain when your performance period ends. You must close out the subaward when all applicable administrative actions and grant-related work have been completed. And this is advice. This is not in your form, guys. So the closeout should be completed in time to meet the federal agency's closeout timeline. You should require the subrecipient to submit all financial, performance, and any other reports to the pass-through entity, to you, 90 days after the end of the subaward's performance period. Now, I'll tell you what that does for you. You have 120 days. So what that gives you is an extra 30 days. They report to you 90 days. They report to you 90 days after, and you have 120 days. So that gives you a 30-day buffer in there. Again, at the bottom of the slide, 200.334. Again, part of the closeout process, you must make prompt payments to subrecipients for any allowable and authorized reimbursable costs charged to the award. That's 334C. And you must establish procedures for the closeout process that addresses refunding excess cash and accounting for real or personal property. Who does the property belong to? Who's the property titled to? That was acquired with any federal funds during the program. And that's .334D and F. Now, early on in the beginning of this presentation, I talked about the OIG findings and why we're doing this training. So I'm going to talk about what the OIG found. The training came about because the OIG found that pass-through entities were not establishing policies and procedures on how subawards will be made and how the subrecipients would be managed. OIG found that ensuring subrecipient monitoring procedures are adequate and implemented effectively. And let me add one other thing, and uniformly. The OIG found that adequately monitoring subrecipients to provide reasonable assurance that they comply with the terms and conditions of the award and ensuring the resources are available for adequate monitoring. Remember, I talked about whether or not you do on-site or whether or not you do a desk review. Well, the OIG found that many pass-through entities had not set aside adequate funds for or were training their people to do monitoring within the program. Pass-through entities were not providing training and technical assistance for their own staff, which involved oversight of the subrecipients. Establishing procedures to ensure subrecipients comply with Single Audit Act requirements. And meeting for FOTA reporting requirements. So this slide where it says, rest assured there's some resources. We're going to go over where you can find a lot of the information. Notice I kept talking about uniform guidance, CFR 2, CFR 200. And each one of the paragraphs or subparagraphs that I mentioned during this presentation is exactly where you'll find it in the CFR. The DOJ grants financial guide. Of course, that should be your guide in how you administer your program and how you manage your subrecipient. Subawards and procurement contracts under OJP awards, that should be a guide for you that you can have access to. And I'm going to read the long name, Standards for Internal Control within the Federal Government, but we all know it as the Green Book. So the Green Book will be a great direct for you on internal control for your subrecipients. And from the Treadway Commission, the Internal Control Framework from COSA. We have at OJP, we've created a toolkit that you can use for subrecipients to help you in your subrecipients. The purpose, let's go over this. The purpose of the scope of the toolkit is to provide guidance to help recipients of OJP grants and cooperative agreements to understand which, if any of the recipients' proposed actions, we would consider a subaward, the definitions that we were talking about earlier. Which of the recipients' proposed actions we would consider procurement. So remember, we talked about what is a subaward and what is a contract. And commonly federal administrative requirements that apply to all or almost all OJP awards. Here's the website, or here's the location for the toolkit. The question always comes up about sole source. Let me go over this very quickly. Sole source is simplified threshold amount greater than $250,000. You need federal approval to go sole source. Sole source is procurement in a non-competitive process. In the uniform guidance, the standards for sole source are found in DAC 320, paragraph C. So when a sole source required by OJP, well, it must cross, as I said, the simplified acquisition threshold, $250,000, and to determine that the award of a contract through competitive process is just not feasible. We can talk about in emergency situations, in a very limited rural area. There are a lot of ways that you can determine that going sole source is just the most feasible way to acquire goods or services. What documentation must be submitted for sole source approval? Non-competitive sole source approval GAM, and you can find that in our Just Grant system. We have a sole source review checklist, and here's the website where you can find that. And one of the greatest, I shouldn't say great, that doesn't sound right. One of the best resources will be us. Here's my contact information and the OJP Customer Service Center contact information, their hours, their phone number, and the website, askocfo@usdoj.gov. Now I think we have enough time for any questions.
Okay, I can ask the first question.
Okay.
We have had difficulty determining whether our local police departments who are receiving funds for attending trainings during overtime hours is a subrecipient or a contract.
The payment to the police officers for their time? I don't understand the question. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes. So we have difficulty determining whether our local police departments who are receiving funds for attending trainings during overtime hours is a subrecipient or a contract.
It is not a contract because they are not providing a good or service to you. Remember the definition that we gave, the little chart that we gave? So that is not a contract. They are not providing any good or service to you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Oh, okay. Second question. In the DOJ Financial Guide, under subrecipients agreement requirements, it says we have to include total amount of federal funds obligated to the subrecipient, including the current financial obligation. I am looking for clarification as to what is needed here. I am interpreting it as the entire amount of federal funds that we as a county is giving to a subrecipient from all grants.
That is the type of program. Yes, you're right. The total amount of money and any designation. Remember, I talked about the UEI number, which used to be the DUNS number, the UEI number for the subrecipient.
If the subrecipient agency doesn't meet the dollar threshold for the single audit, can we request or require their agency's audit and or financial review to help assess risk?
Yes. Remember we talked about, remember I talked about you can impose more restrictive terms and conditions on your subrecipient if you do not hinder them from creating the objectives of the program. For carrying out the objectives of the program.
Does DOJ, OJP, offer any assistance on reviewing policies and procedures to monitor subrecipients developed by the pass-through entity?
That is a question for your program office. I don't know exactly, when you say, I don't know exactly what you would want. Would you want, because I gave you the guidelines or the guidebook and the DOJ financial guide, and we host trainings. So I don't exactly know exactly what you would, what more would you like to have or like to see?
If I could chime in, this is Crystal McMillwright. I just wanted to say that to the grantee that asked this particular question, when we do go out and monitor, we do review a copy of subrecipient procedures, and then at that time we can certainly provide some feedback on them if that's what you're asking. To ensure that what is being captured is what is necessary. As Ira said, we've gone over specific criteria and those things that can be put into such a procedure, but we can certainly offer some feedback, when we are reviewing those policies.
If we have another entity owned by the tribe and we apply for a grant that is solely intended to be passed down to our other entity, would we be required to do the same assessment as we would be required to do for other entities?
The entity is 100% owned by the tribe? I don't know. That is a good question, and I can get the answer for you. And if you could find out who the grantee that asked the question, and I could come back to them with an answer for that.
Okay, I've noted that. Regarding risk assessment, I don't feel qualified to do a legal or financial assessment of a subrecipient entity. I have no specialty in those areas. Who in my government agency should I engage to do that?
Once again, that is when you can go to your program office, and as Crystal McNeil-Wright just said, when we come out, we can help you do your risk assessment of your subrecipient.
Can contracts under the $250,000 threshold be considered sole source? If so, do you not need approval because the contract is below the threshold?
Simplified acquisition threshold is $250,000, and that's when you need prior federal approval. Below $250,000, you do not need prior federal approval, and they can be sole source.
Is there a subrecipient monitoring plan template available?
There is the toolkit that I can't get back to it now. There is the toolkit that I showed you the website for. And so I believe everyone on the call today is going to get a copy of the slides. That can be that can be the exact same thing.
What are some examples of goods and services?
Less of an example of goods and services, more of examples who's providing the goods and services. An accounting firm that comes out and does an audit, and on a regular basis, they are not only providing you an audit, but they provide other clients, so they have other clients that they provide audits to, would be an example of a service that you receive. They are not a beneficiary and they are not a part of the program. They're just doing an audit. A computer company that provides software to the entity, to the pass-through entity, again, they're in business to provide software. They're not a part of the program. That chart that I showed that had if there's no program on the side, that's subrecipient. If they're in business, if they're a for-profit, or they don't have to be a for-profit business, but they're in business and it's what they do for many other people other than you, then that is a good or a service. So any good or service that you use to facilitate the work you are doing, computer software, an accounting firm that does audit, furniture in your building, any of those things that facilitate your program are goods and services.
If an organization decides to terminate a subaward and the award specifically asks to have a subaward, would the organization needs to find a new one and review the time task plan?
Can you read that again?
Okay. If an organization decides to terminate a subaward and the award specifically asks to have a subaward, would the organization need to find a new subaward and review the time task plan? Since this would be a new organization that might have different strategies versus contracting to carry out the established plan.
Yes, you would. You could have a, and I think if I understand the question correctly, you could have a subrecipient for the subaward. You could have a subrecipient who has a subrecipient. So you could, so yes, you could. And if you have to terminate that subaward, you could refine, assuming you go through the same criteria, the same risk assessment, same, and determining whether or not it is a contractor or a subrecipient. Assuming you go through those steps as in uniform guidance, you can replace that subrecipient with another subrecipient.
If you have a subrecipient who does not spend their entire contract, do you adjust the FFATA report at the close of the contract?
At the close of the contract, yes. I have a couple of, I believe I have a couple of my colleagues on the phone. Can you address that part, address that question?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Athena Jallo. The question that you're referring to is about the audit firm?
No, it's about the FFATA. So what they're asking is if they have a subrecipient who does not spend the entire contract, which is what they reported in FFATA. So at the end of the contract, do they need to go back and revise the FFATA?
Let me look into that and I'll get back to you. Can you document that, Crystal, please? Or Sarah?
Okay, I just did.
Thank you.
Sure. The next question. Can you talk more about the 2023 financial management training in November? Is it required for people to attend in person? how is the 2-day seminar different than the hour-long online trainings?
Couple of things. It is different, obviously different because it is in person. And we have received a fair amount of interest from grantees. I shouldn't say fair amount. We've received huge interest from grantees to move back to in-person training that was stopped with the pandemic. So the difference is that you get to come into OJP, get to come into our offices. You will receive training. It's a 2-day training, and you'll receive training from experts on each one of the areas that we talk about in the online training. But you get to ask questions, you get to interact with other grantees, and it's just online. It is just in-person training versus online training. So, and part of that question, I think you said, is it required? It is not required that you do it. It is required that you take the training, but it's not required that you attend online training. But we have found that grantees strongly want to have in-person training.
The last part of that question is, how does the 2-day seminar different than the hour-long online training?
I don't think the online training is an hour. Online training is much longer than an hour. And so it is much more in-depth. And again, you are here and you get to ask questions and you get to have one-on-one sessions, and we're going to have breakout sessions with expertise with experts on specific areas. So the training is much more interactive than the online training would be.
If you are, I guess this is an example. If you are, example of the example you gave, I guess, of the audit firm, are the goods and services under a procurement contract?
If you are, say the first part again, please.
I believe they're referring back to the example you gave of the audit firm. And so they're asking, are the goods and services under a procurement contract?
Let's say the audit service you receive from the audit firm, yes, it is not part of your grant award. The accounting firm is not a beneficiary of the program. And yes, it would be goods and services. It would be goods and services you contracted to receive from an accounting firm or from a provider.
Okay, so at this moment, that is all of the questions that wait, is there another one coming in? Okay. Okay. Let's see. Well, we're going to get back to the FFATA question. They said they were told to adjust the amount. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, that's it for the questions.
Okay. Once again, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everybody online for attending our webinar on oversight responsibilities for subrecipients today. Of course, we're going to have other webinars, and they will be announced, and just like we announced this one. In fact, a week from today, we're going to have a webinar on conference costs on September 21st. And as I said, we're going to very soon, maybe even before that webinar a week from today, we're going to open up registration for our November 1st and 2nd 2-day basic online training here in OJP. So please, if you're interested in attending the in-person training, please keep an eye out for that announcement so you can register and secure your spot. Thank you again for your time this afternoon. And I believe you're going to get copies of the slides that we use. Again, my name is Ira Holmes. I'm training and policy manager here at OCFO. Thank you very much.